We're getting to that time of year where you start to reflect upon the things that have gone well, the things that haven't gone so well, and what you want to do about it moving forward. So today I want to talk about what has gone well for me in terms of my consulting gig or consulting career, so to speak, and what hasn't gone so well. So let's get into it. Now, I've got here written, this year didn't test every belief I had about independence, but it did something more important. And that is, it showed me the difference between surviving as a contractor and thriving as a true independent consultant. And 2025 made the distinction painfully clear. And I say that for so many different reasons. But for those of you who know, I've done both the inside of IR35 contracting for those of you within the UK, and I'm also doing the outside of IR35 contracting, or I'm doing that currently right now. And so whether you are from the UK, outside, whatever it may be, is essentially a general contractor versus an independent consultant. And so there are distinctions between the two. And actually that transition is what I'm referring to in terms of some of the pain that I may have experienced, as well as gain. Now, again, it's important to note that if you're trying to be an independent, so to speak, this isn't some Instagram reel or some fancy thing that you see online that a lot of people may parade or show. This is real life. And I'm not even trying to be cheesy, it's true. So there are operational things, there are emotional things, there are mental things, there are financial things to consider when jumping into this space. Now, again, there's obviously a clear gap between inside and outside if you're in the UK. There's obviously a clear gap between delivering and doing the work versus advisory and providing a different type of value, focusing on outcomes. The emotional friction of being an external expert is something to note as well, because you're not necessarily welcomed by everybody. And there is a certain level of resilience that you need in order for you to be successful, i.e. stay in the game. That's what success is. It's not trying to amass loads of contracts and blah, blah. It's staying in the game, especially in the market where actually employment is very difficult, finding work is difficult, business can be difficult, but that doesn't have to necessarily be your experience, depending on where you're at, who you are, and what you're aiming to do proactively. So there's a whole bunch of things associated with this. And so when we keep it moving, for anyone who is interested in trying to check out this whole independent consulting thing, this portfolio career thing, I have created a readiness assessment that you can take in order to help you understand whether you're in the right space to do this or not. So if you're interested, make sure to click the link below so you can learn more information on how to do this. And so let's continue with this session. So section 1 is what worked well. So what are the wins? So first one I'd say is I successfully set up a PMO structure, not quite from scratch. I don't think that's quite accurate, so to speak. There was something reminiscent there, but the place that I went to do this specific contract required some PMO services. And so set that up from scratch. So for those of you within the program space, you'll understand what that means. That's essentially developing a function that provides the right level of risk and issue management, reporting, escalation, administration, all these different things related to managing a program successfully and appropriately. The second thing I'd say is there was definitely an ensuing maturity that was required for the governance within the different spaces that I'd been in. And so that's just a fancy way of saying developing the clear rules and guidelines required to make decisions when it came to a specific program. Really important if you're a program professional, a project professional, et cetera, because if you don't know exactly how you're making decisions, how you're approving things, how risks and issues are escalated, it becomes very difficult to manage anything. So it's the rules of the games, it's the boundaries, it's all that kind of stuff there. And that takes longer than you think for those of you who understand. Then there was also an opportunity for me to install what's called MSP style, I would say, frameworks. And so MSP stands for Managing Successful Programs. This was an opportunity for me to install something that was standard across not just the UK, but other parts of the world, so that my client got the most gold standard service that they could get when it came to actually setting up a project. So these are all the PMO things that worked really well. Now, when it came to improving maturity, it was just making sure that there was a rhythmic cycle. Okay, so what I mean by that is meeting with PMs, so project managers and workstream leads, making sure that they were clear of progress, risk, and issues, ensuring that they were able to untie and tackle things that maybe our key stakeholders needed to be aware of. So again, this is making sure there was a clear cadence and reporting structure set up. And of course, this links to all of this stuff here as well. So I don't want to be redundant in what I'm saying, but I guess the final thing is that I've clearly been in a space where I've provided the PMO support as a program manager, okay, actually managing the program, so to speak, but also acting as an advisor, doing consultations on key documentations and, ideations and thinking and brainstorming around strategically, what do operations need to look like? Strategically, how do we tackle the future? And so these are all things that I've definitely been involved in and definitely have been huge wins and ticks within my time within the last year or so. So these are huge wins that I would definitely sort of like pat myself on the back for. There's also the other situation in terms of me as a consultant, as in outside of my program management sort of like world. And actually, it's been the ability to continue to write proposals. I've learned from different people and implemented new things and adapted and enhanced my proposal writing in order to ensure that I'm exposing the value that I can provide. And so with that in mind, I'm quite happy with how I've written proposals, writing clear deliverables, being very clear about the objectives, being clear about my methodology and approach, being clear about my understanding of the problem that I'm aiming to solve, and also being clear about my boundaries or freedom, should we say, as an outside of IR35 consultant. So these are all really important things. And so this has enabled me to not only stick to what I've been contracted to do, so to speak, but also it meant that I've been able to measure success, which has been a huge win. And actually tracking on a weekly basis the activities that I do, which has been phenomenal when understanding almost like a heat map of what you do, so to speak. And so these are really important stuff that I would argue are big wins. And so it's moving from just pure outputs, which are deliverables focused, and shaping outcomes. So what are the desired things that we want to happen, so to speak, is moving from just helping the team to acting as an advisor, as I said as well. So this is to directors. This is also to senior PMs. And this is also to other stakeholders as well. So these are all different ways in which I've been able to do this stuff. And there's also been, again, moving away from just merely following a process to creating systems and processes, whether this is a terms of reference or a governance structure or some sort of assurance framework. It's moved away from just following to creating, so to speak, which has been fantastic. Now, it's not to say I wasn't doing these things before, but it's become even more apparent within this space. Now, again, I think another win is the fact that it's been a brutal year for consultants. Not just for consultants, but for anyone looking for some sort of work. And so the fact that I've been able to, again, hold my contracts has been fantastic. And actually, I've had the ability to extend my contract. And so all of these things here, contract continuity, extended multiple times, this is strengthened by client relationships, i.e. the relationships I have with my client is healthy. It has enabled me to prove my value. And this is why I talk about the PAR all the time. Okay, you saw it in the last bit. Problem. Okay, what key problem are you trying to solve? Action. What is the methodology that you utilize in order to resolve that problem? And results. What key outcomes or benefits are you trying to, again, realize, so to speak? So really important stuff. And I want to note this, like this was all whilst I was navigating very, very difficult personal circumstances. I can't lie to you. I'm not going to get into it, but I've had 2 relatives who passed away this year, which is difficult for anyone, And so that does a lot to you. And I may touch on it a little bit, but I won't go into detail for obvious reason. And so these have been the wins in terms of my year so far from a consulting standpoint. Now, what are the hard truths? What didn't go so well? The reality is, when you jump into a contract of some sorts, there are certain people who just have a viewpoint in terms of what you're about, what you're trying to do. You're trying to take over. You want to stay there forever and you get paid this huge day rate, etc., etc. The viewpoint is what? There isn't I'm not going to say an abundance mindset, but there isn't an open mindset. That's the issue, because the openness enables collaboration and enables partnership and enables results. But if there are loggerheads, it's not really going to work out. And so some people are just not welcoming because they have a warped view of what consultants are about, so to speak. And so I got frostiness, I got hesitation, I got defensiveness, I got slow replies, and I got some undermining. And so you have to reposition yourself and remind yourself of who you are, okay? And actually allow no one to do that. You do that in a professional means, but you don't let anyone bully you. Because at the end of the day, you're in this space for a reason. So that's the first thing. The second thing I'd say is that when it comes to actually delivering on a program, it is dependent upon people. And it's no Sherlock, so to speak, But the reality is, there are certain people that just need to make decisions. Whether this is leadership or project lead or workstream lead or a senior responsible officer or whatever it may be. And again, this has been over the years. This is not just this year, just in general. They have to make key decisions that allows the floodgates of activity to happen. But of course, if the governance isn't there, or there is absence, or there's an understanding of what actually needs to be done, etc., it can create some difficulties and challenges. And so it's about being able to acknowledge and respect the situation that is apparent at hand, and finding ways to communicate this to the approver or the person who's holding things back. A lot of people know that if you're doing some sort of project or program, whether it's public sector or private sector, the biggest issue is the fact that there isn't enough resources or capacity or money to fund some of the activities. And so then you think to yourself, at the scoping and initiation phase and planning phase, why wasn't this baked in? And it comes down to the fact that, at times, there isn't enough time to actually develop these business cases and do the work. Or there are situations where, executive leadership or senior leadership believe that actually we can work that out later, and it's never worked out. And so this is where these bottlenecks exist. And so, again, it's interesting, like some of these things came into play and caused some huge issues when it came to delivering some of this work. The other thing I'd mention is that although I was able to maintain contracts, there was definitely anxiety around contract extensions. And actually, there have been situations where this year, of course, where I've had to work part-time, which is perfectly fine. And when I say part-time, I don't really mean part-time in the real sense of the word. I mean a reduced amount of time in order to work out how I was going to extend the contract, and using creative innovation and, other different means and ways, and working alongside my client as well, because obviously they have a part to play as well. There had to be unique ways in order to make those extensions happen. And I'm grateful for those ways, and I'm grateful for the clients to be open for those opportunities to happen. But again, it can create anxiety, especially if it's already been a very tough year, if not couple of years, so to speak. I'm saying so to speak a lot, I'm realizing. And so there can be some chasing, there can be some stress, there can be some waiting, there can be some awkward turtles, that form. And it can be frustrating at times. Simultaneously, you don't want to rely just on one client. I had a conversation with a not quite an old school friend, a good friend of mine. We hadn't spoken in a while, and they've just jumped into the whole sort of consulting space or business owner space. And they essentially asked me, do you just have one client or do you have multiple clients? And I said, look, leaning on the experience from other friends who have done this before, I think one major foundational client makes sense. And then any form of freelance advisory and or freelance consulting work that you do, you start to develop that to a point where it may even take over the foundational consulting work that you do. So that's always been my strategy. That's why I talk about core growth and the learning or scaling model. You have to understand that there's always going to be a bedrock of things that make sense. And if I didn't do that, who knows where I'd be? I mean, you could argue it's slowing me down, so to speak, but this is the model that makes sense for me right now until I transition and evolve into something bigger, badder, and bolder. Very cheesy. Cool. So these are all things that are important to recognize. And actually, it's important to recognize that even though you are independent, it doesn't mean you are infallible from, the market shocks or a client saying, hey, we don't need you no more. But I had to remember that this didn't necessarily describe or determine or define my value as a consultant, as a person. It just meant that potentially at the time, the client saw that there may not be opportunities to continue together. And that has to be okay, even if it doesn't feel okay. And so the next thing I want to talk about is the fact that a lot of these different things happen. Like I said, relatives passed away, which created emotional fatigue, some financial strain, mental distraction. And of course, you're still expected to work at a high level. And what I mean by that is, this is me not saying that the client expected to just forget everything that was happening. That is definitely not the case. If anything, they showed great empathy, great care, multiple different clients, whether it's the trustee staff, et cetera, et cetera. But it's still difficult. It's still difficult to manage in that space because you're working things out and you're thinking, oh my gosh, if I don't work, it's going to be peak because you don't want to eat into certain things or whatever it may be. So yeah, there's a lot to consider there. And so life can hit you, can slap you upside the head, okay? Like proper wet slap. But it just means you have to show up in different ways than what you're used to showing up in. But it did show me that I was resilient regardless. Now, we don't have to be this, hard person who's like always like tough and works it out. I've always been seeing that person, he'll be fine. He'll work it out. It's not a problem. Sometimes you want to be vulnerable and you want to have that level of support or whatever it may be. And so I'm grateful for the people in my life, whether it's the male friends or female friends and family, et cetera, et cetera. So all very important stuff. So then where are we going with all of this stuff? So essentially, what this is telling me is that what I would like is more high-value advisory work, whether this is B2B or B2C, okay? So I want to be able to be that strategic arm, that strategic person, that coach, that mentor in a professional setting that ensures that performance is enhanced or improved, okay? Whether you use the word governance, risk and issues, delivery, et cetera, elements of that is what I want to help people do and optimize for. So again, I've already spoken about strategic input. More C-suite conversations is great. I'm having much more of those, which is really good. And actually, doing the stuff that I'm doing now has been fantastic. The last, I would say 3 years. 4 years, 3.5 years, should we say. Last 3.5 years or so, I've been firmly in the seat of direct conversations with directors and executives and all of those different types of people, CEOs. That's become the norm. And so understanding how they operate, how they think, what their challenges are, what their pains are, has been so valuable. And so I want more of that to happen. I want more of that to develop and progress, so to speak, because I think I do it pretty well. I have a good balance of knowing how to be strategic, but also accommodating to the point where I can also be firm and bringing my point across. And so, yeah, I think I've had the opportunity to really flaunt that stuff that I knew I could do in my day-to-day with friends, family, coaching clients. But when it came to this consulting space, slightly different. So really good stuff there. I think the other thing is less technical delivery. I'm not opposed to that. If it pays the bills, great, but less technical delivery potentially. And less doing and more direction. Now, I can't run away from that completely, but there is an opportunity to definitely do that. And if I can move more to a fractional style model, that may be seen as a freelance style model, then so be it, because it means that there's a bit more control. If I understand that pipeline more, that would be fantastic. So this is kind of defining my portfolio career. For those of you who know me, I talk about the portfolio career quite a bit. And essentially all that really is it is the makeup of the different things that you do within your career, the things that pay you money, or at least increase your competencies, so to speak. So yeah, this is what the next year should look like for me. Now, of course, right now, consulting is going very, very well. And also mentoring is starting to pick up a bit more because people are seeing what I'm doing and all that kind of stuff there. There's a question of whether I'm undercharging, whether I'm over-delivering. I'm definitely doing this from time to time. I need to minimize that. And whether I'm helping too much, which is something that a lot of people have said to me. Mike, you do too much for people. So again, there is a focus more on making sure that the charge is correct. There is a protection of my expertise and attracting the right clients and scaling the mentoring arm properly. So this is not a problem when it comes to the consulting bit. But when it comes to the mentoring bit, yeah, because I have a bit of a heart. But sometimes if you have a heart, you get broke. And the Lord knows I don't want to be broke. So, point being made is that there are some lessons to learn here. The other thing to note is that I think there is a salient opportunity to work more within or with these different countries. I know when I've done sort of like stuff on Instagram with people from the US, there's a certain energy, like we bounce off each other, you know? And you only get that with some people within the UK, but it's not necessarily the same. Of course, you need to find the right people. Birds of a feather flock together. And so if I can explore these a bit more, that'd be fantastic. So if you're that sort of person, if you are within a similar field, different field, but there is synergy there that you think, hit me up in the comments. Let me know. Let me know. And maybe we could try something together. And so the sorts of things that I'd like to do is more talking engagements, paid ones. If there's opportunity to do free ones that make sense, I'll do that. More podcast opportunities, maybe, joint ventures or collaborations. I call them not partnerships, but collaborations in terms of workshops and stuff. I care less about that. I'd rather be a guest on something because I think it's just easier and neater that way. I don't want to do, I'm doing enough as it is. But if the price is right, if the opportunity is right, I'm onto it. And it's also understanding, but because the business is digital, is global by nature, it's remembering that. So yeah, it's just seeing all this stuff. If you're reading this and you're thinking, okay, this looks like it's speaking to me, it's because it is. The way I set up these videos is that I record my thoughts and then I get it translated by AI. That's essentially what it is. And so where are we sort of like filtering off with? Okay, so this is a key point here. Growth equals reflection plus correction. Let me say that again. Growth equals reflection plus correction. It doesn't mean anything if you don't reflect first and then you correct. And so 2025 taught me that consulting freedom isn't something you gain. It's something you maintain through clarity, systems, value, and resilience. And what do I mean by this? You need to be clear about the value that you provide. You need to have templates and systems and processes that you can follow a framework of some sorts. This provides your value, but that's demonstrated through you hitting your deliverables and hitting your milestones and hitting your objectives on time, within scope and on budget. And a resilience is your bounceability, how you're able to bounce back from difficult situations and times again and again and again and again and again. That's what resilience is. And finally, it says here, your greatest lesson doesn't come from the wins. They come from what the wins cost. They come from what the wins cost. So you may get a win, but what did it take in order for me to get that win? I've already spoken about the sacrifices and the challenges and all those different things there. And so it is not for free, this independence life, even though freedom is what we are seeking. And so hopefully that makes sense. Of course, if you're interested in becoming an independent consultant or a flourishing independent portfolio careerist, then make sure to click on the link below that takes you to this self-assessment. Now, of course, that was a lot of things that I reeled off there, but essentially it's been a great year of fantastic wins where I've been able to sustain a healthy contract, both in the value that I provide, the value that I receive, and just being able to grow in the process. In addition to that, amidst personal circumstances, it has been difficult to navigate emotionally, mentally, and financially at times. And so with that in mind, moving forward is about making sure that I'm creating something that develops the right resilience buffer and that has the right systems and approaches to minimize things as best as possible. I can't help a black swan event, whether that's from a personal standpoint or from a professional standpoint or even macroeconomic standpoint. But what I can do is minimize as much as possible. If you want to see more videos centered around how you can develop a flourishing independent portfolio career, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, and like this video. And as always, my friends, understand, reach, and expand. Peace.